section, and we'll go through those parts of the Q&A section at the end. So yes, use both, but especially if you've got a question that you definitely want us to look at, please type that in the Q&A. All right. So our topic for this evening is the ABCs of positive behavior management. So thanks again to Julie for coming up with a good title for this. Very important, I think, the word positive in there, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. So before we get into talking about behavior management, quick game, which I'm sure you've played before, 3 truths and a lie. You already know I'm from Scotland, so don't worry, that's not one of the facts, but here are 4 facts about me. One of them is not true. So I'm going to show you these facts and you can tell me which one is the lie. Just type a letter. That's all you need to do. So A is I can speak 3 languages. B, I'm 192 centimeters tall. C, I studied engineering at university. And D, one of my favorite hobbies is baking cakes and bread and things like that. So which of these 4 facts about me, which of these is not true? Oh, great. Lots of guesses. A few guesses for D's and A's. Yeah, and B. Oh, we've got just about all of them. An equal spread. Well, I'm going to say very well done to Blanquita. And who else? Nympha, you both, and Huang something. You all correctly guessed that A is the lie. I can't speak 3 languages. I can speak English and I can speak Chinese fairly well, but that is it. I think my failed experience learning French at high school doesn't count, but I am 172 centimeters tall. Surprisingly, I did study civil engineering at university, and I do love baking. Anyway, so that's me. Tell me a bit about you now. So we've got a little poll here. Julie, maybe you can launch the poll for us. So it would be great if you could tell us, thanks Julie, which segment do you teach? You can tick more than one. So do you teach mainly very young learners, like kindergarten students from 2 to 5? Do you teach young learners, so it's kind of primary school age? Do you teach teens or university students or adults, or no one at all? So you can quickly vote on that and tell us which of those do you teach? Okay, I can't see that anymore. I've got no idea what the answer is. There we go. Thank you, Julie. So lots of very young learner teachers and teens, but the most, 63%, 43 of you teach young learners. Fantastic. All right. Thanks very much for sharing that information. So today we're going to be talking about behavior management, obviously something that probably mostly concerns young learners, very young learners, but I think there will still be something here for you, useful for you if you teach teens. And even I think some of the techniques can be useful for, I think, engaging adults as well. All right, so let's move on. So firstly, I wanted to talk about why we're talking about behavior in today's webinar. Well, I also wanted to ask you all, why did you come? Like, why is this an interesting topic for you? Maybe you can reply in the chat. Why is behavior an interesting topic for you? While you type that, I'll tell you why it's an interesting topic for me. First reason for me is that teachers, when I do training, almost always request this topic. I like to ask teachers, what are your biggest challenges in the classroom? And lots of teachers tell me managing behavior. Great. Kent says that behavior can make or break your class. Absolutely. I think another reason it's very important is for students. If you think back to your own time at school, if you were with a teacher who was overly strict, that could be quite a stressful experience. And also, if you're in a class where the teacher couldn't manage the behavior of the rest of the class, that's not very enjoyable either. Yeah, so Jay says he's teaching young learners and has observed that the biggest challenge is behavior. Yeah, absolutely. So I think, yeah, kind of similar to what I think it was Ken said, it's very difficult to get anything else done in class without behavior management. So if you can't manage students' behavior effectively, then effective. Yes, so Mia says, I believe managing children's behavior goes hand in hand with being able to teach effectively. I completely agree with you there, Mia, absolutely. It's also hard work to manage students' behavior. And I would also finally say that managing behavior of students is mostly, I would say, about the preparation. So today we're going to be talking about proactive and positive behavior management, mainly. So expect really lots of ideas and techniques to get your students, to encourage your students to behave well, rather than ways to solve problems when your students are already starting to misbehave. Before I get into talking about what we're going to do today, I wanted to talk about punishment very quickly. So I've chosen a picture of an iceberg here, as I think icebergs are famous because most of what they are is underwater. So it's very difficult to see all of an iceberg, or impossible to see all of an iceberg. You can only see one tiny part of the iceberg at any one time. And I think it's a little bit like punishment in class. So in class, we might punish a student and, you know, to get them to sit down or to be quiet or to get on with their work. And that's the bit that we see as teachers. But for the students themselves, there are a lot of other things that go along with punishment. So what I want you to do, or what I'd like you to do, is to type in the chat, just think about a time when you were a student, when you were punished at school. What were some feelings that came along with being punished? Maybe things that you might have felt, or you might have thought that your teacher was not aware of. Maybe you can type just a word in the chat is fine. Great. Aaron says, I wasn't being punished, but being blamed for something I didn't do. So maybe you might have felt that was unfair. Michelle says, embarrassed. Yeah, I think a lot of the problem with punishment is not just you're being punished, but you're being punished in front of other people. Yeah, Greta says being unhappy. Kirsten says, I felt shame. Yeah, I think I've got the word humiliation later on. Megan mentions injustice, negative feelings, unsettled, embarrassed. Great. Here's some of my words here. Humiliation, I put angry. I think some students often feel angry after being punished. Some students might feel that this teacher doesn't like me. They don't like me, and that's why they're punishing me. Some students might afterwards feel like they want revenge on the teacher. Some students might feel that this wasn't fair. They might even say, I don't care anymore if this teacher punishes me. I don't really care about this subject. You might feel that you don't understand why you're being punished. I can remember being punished at middle school for something, and still to this day, I don't know what it was that I was meant to have done wrong. So those are lots of problems, I think, with punishment. So today, all of our techniques and things are not focused on punishment, but they're positive ways of managing behavior. And I think it's really important just to remember that all of you there typed in really negative feelings there, right? Humiliation, feeling something's unfair. And I think it's useful to bear in mind that for your students, they're going to do better in class when they feel good about themselves. And they're probably going to do worse in class when they feel bad about themselves. So I often ask teachers who say, oh, I have to punish my students. I say, well, do you think your students do better in class when they feel bad about themselves or when they feel good about themselves? Or when they feel good about themselves. So let's start off with that point of view, that maybe we can try and avoid punishment where possible. Okay, so our plan for today is we are going to, first of all, look at, well, really not first of all, throughout today, we're going to look at 5 case studies. So I've got 5 examples of students. They're all real students, although the names have been changed. 5 misbehaving students. And for each student, we're going to discuss why that student might be misbehaving and what mistakes their teacher might have made. Now, I should say I'm not a child psychologist. I've got lots of experience teaching and doing teacher training, but I'm not a psychologist. Don't know about special needs of children. So we're really here talking about just average children and how we can help them behave better. And we'll also be looking at proactive strategies to encourage these students, so the students in the case studies, to behave better, but also how you can encourage your students to behave better. And finally, at the very end, I'll give you 7 tips for how I think we can all try to react better to negative behavior. So we're mostly going to be looking at proactive strategies, preventative strategies, but at the end, we'll also briefly talk about 7 tips for reacting when there are behavior problems in class. So let's get started. So this is called the ABCs of positive behavior. So this is case A, and this student is called Anthony. So what I want you to do is tell me, why do you think Anthony is behaving in the way he's behaving? So Anthony crawls on the floor in class. He touches the screen at the front of the class, and that changes the courseware. And every time this happens, his teacher comes up, picks him up, and moves him back to his seat. And Anthony stays still for a few minutes, and then he gets up and does the same thing all over again. And his teacher finds it very frustrating. So, why do you think Anthony is behaving in this way? Why do you think Anthony is doing this? Great. Okay, lots of you said he wants attention. Seda says he is bored. Absolutely. But most of you have said attention. So we will talk more about boredom later. But yes, I completely agree with you that this student is someone who wants attention. And even more than that, the teacher is giving Anthony attention. So every time Anthony stands up, crawls along the ground, touches the screen, the teacher gives him attention, okay, by picking him up. And I think we all tend to do this, don't we? It's very easy for us to find students who are misbehaving and give them attention, but yeah, that's probably not ideal. Yes. So definitely attention-seeking behavior. So let's talk about students who want attention. All right, what's the challenge here? Well, I think everyone, more or less everyone, likes getting attention, right? People like being praised, like being made to feel special. But some students, maybe they don't get enough attention at home. Maybe that's just part of their personality. They like getting attention. And maybe in class, the only time they feel the teacher notices them is when they act up. All right, so maybe for some particularly smart or bright or able students, they might get a lot of attention from the teacher for when they do well in class, answer questions correctly. But for some students, maybe the only time the teacher notices them or they feel noticed by the teacher is when they're acting up. And these students who want attention, they might also do things like shout out in class instead of putting up their hand. They might annoy other students. They might ask for help when they don't really need help. Always kind of try and get attention. So what are some solutions? Well, I think we all need to find opportunities to give students attention when they're behaving well, instead of giving students attention when they are behaving badly. So this is sometimes called catching your students being good. So very easy as teachers to look around the class and notice who's not behaving and say something to them, but much more difficult, I think, is finding the students who are behaving and catching them. All right, so I wanted to talk about how you can use praise to overcome this problem. All right, so you all know about praise. I'm sure you all give your students praise, but here I want to talk about using praise strategically in class to stop negative behavior. So there's really 2 or 3 steps to this process. So the first step is planning your praise before class. So what does that do? All you need to do to begin with is write a list of behaviors that you want your students to stop. So maybe you've got a class and I don't know, they're very noisy, or they don't put up their hands, or I don't know what it is, right? So write down a list of things that you want your students to stop doing in class. And then next you need to decide, what does the opposite of these behaviors look like? So it's very easy to find students who are doing something that we don't want them to do, but we have to think of not what we don't want students to do, what we do want students to do. So what does the opposite of these behaviors look like? So for example, if it's a student who's talking over the teacher, we're not saying don't talk over the teacher. We're saying maybe listen attentively to the teacher. Or maybe instead of saying we don't want students to keep things to themselves, right? We want them to share. Well, then the opposite of that would be sharing resources. All right. And then you need to describe these behaviors in very simple language. So write down what it is that you want your students to do in very simple language. And then in class, get ready to use these. So when you see one of the students doing one of these positive behaviors in class, you need to praise them. All right. So as soon as you see a student who is listening attentively, you can say, oh, well done, David is listening very well. Well done, David, right? Maybe a point to your team or whatever your reward system is. And next, when you see some negative behavior in class, don't punish the student who's not doing what you want. Instead, pause and look around the room and try to find someone who is behaving. All right, so maybe there's 2 students who are talking instead of listening. Well, instead of punishing those students, find a student near them who is listening and say, oh, well done. Amy is listening very well. 1 point for Amy's team. So you're almost shining a spotlight onto the students who are behaving well, giving them attention, and that should encourage other students to behave in the same way. And finally, when the misbehaving students fall into line, when they start doing what you want them to do, then praise those students. Okay, so let's do a little example together. I've got this wonderful image from Imagine of a flamingo in class. And I want you to imagine that this is your class and you've got a very distracting flamingo at the back of class. And one of your students, this little boy here, who's got this yellow circle that I've drawn around him, he is distracted by the flamingo. Okay, so I think a typical teacher reaction would be to say, Andy, let's pretend this student here is called Andy, might say, Andy, stop looking at the flamingo. But that's not what we want to do, right? Because there we're focusing on the negative behavior. So what I wanted to ask you guys was, how could you use praise to get Andy's attention back here? What could you do? What could you say to get Andy to pay attention here? What do you think you could do, or what could you say to get Andy's attention back? Great. So Aaron says, yes, absolutely. You could say, okay, everyone, look at the flamingo. Absolutely. So that is true. You can, I think if all your students or a lot of them are becoming distracted, then I think it is okay to look at the distraction and make that part of your class. I once taught a class where we were on, I think, the 3rd floor of a shopping mall, and all of a sudden a man appeared outside cleaning the windows, and all the students turned around and they were amazed. So, you know, we had to go and look at the man and talk about what he was doing. Right, so Kirsten says, good job to those who are listening to me. Great. Catherine says, yes, Andy and Anna are very good. They are listening. Great. So great examples. So yes, what we could do is say, who's paying attention? Who's listening in class? And then maybe pick a student sitting near Andy and say, well done, Jeff. You were paying attention very well. We could also, if we've divided our class into teams, I think that's very common with primary school students, we could say, which team is looking at me? Which team's looking at me? Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 students in this team are looking at me. Great. 5 points to your team. How about this team? 1, 2, 3. Well done. 6 students in this team, right? And there we're doing something to praise the students who are doing what we want. And then finally, very important, after Andy starts paying attention, we can praise Andy. So that's a little bit about how to use praise strategically. So how to give students attention when they are behaving well, instead of giving students attention when they are behaving badly. Okay, so that was our A in our ABCs of behavior. So A is for attention. That's why I think a lot of students misbehave, because they want attention. And our proactive strategy is to use praise, but use it strategically. All right, so think about negative behaviors, translate them to the opposite, to a positive behavior, and then look out for those behaviors in class. All right, so now we are on to B. So this is case B. This is Bob and Betty. So take a look at this and tell me, why do you think Bob and Betty are misbehaving? So Bob and Betty sit next to each other at the back of class. 2 students in this class are playing a game at the front of the room. And when that happens, Bob and Betty chat to each other. And the teacher keeps saying to them, oh, pay attention. Listen to the student playing the game. But he finds it impossible to get them to pay attention when those students are playing a game at the front. So why do you think Bob and Betty are behaving this way? Why are Bob and Betty not paying attention? Why are they chatting? Okay, so James says they're not involved in the game. They've got nothing to do. The devil makes work for idle hands. Absolutely. Blanquita says lack of interest. Yes, lack of interest. They're not involved, says Nymphia. And I think it was Rena down here said they are bored. Yes, they've been left out. They're not engaged. So I completely agree with everything you all said there. I think these students are not involved, and therefore they are bored. And as you say, the devil makes, what is it, light work of idle hands? Anyway, the challenge, I think, for this is, if people are bored, they entertain themselves, don't they? So perhaps you, when you're on the way home from work tonight or tomorrow, and you're waiting for your subway train or for your bus to arrive, are you going to sit and I don't know, stare into the sky? Probably not. You're probably going to take out your phone very quickly and start looking at it. You're going to entertain yourself. And I think that's also what students do. They also entertain themselves. Now, I think the older students are, probably the longer they can wait. But I would say if you're teaching kindergarten students, you don't want them waiting for much more than about 10 or 20 seconds in class. Primary school students, probably less than a minute. Okay, so children, if they need to wait in class, they'll find something to do for themselves. So Aaron here's talked about something was too easy for them, and we will definitely talk about that point later on as well. Okay, so some solutions for students who are bored. Well, firstly, I think you can try and involve all the students in the class in everything. Make sure that your students always have something to do in class, and make sure they always have a reason to listen. Now, I think with something like a game, quite easy to involve students in games because you can just play games in groups. But I want to show you a couple of whole class activities where I think students often get bored. Okay, so here's the first one. This activity is called zooming out. So I've got a picture here. I want you guys to take a look at the picture. What is this? What do you think you're looking at in the picture? What can you see here? Any ideas? Tentacles, says Blanquita. A couple of you think mushrooms. Julie thinks an octopus. Jay thinks a fig. Wow, okay. Kent also thinks an octopus. Oh, I suppose it looks like the sucker of an octopus, doesn't it? Aaron says it looks like a cell under a microscope. Definitely something very small, isn't it? Chris, you're very close with a sea animal. Absolutely. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is show you the same thing again. It's bigger than an amoeba and definitely bigger than coronavirus. Here is the same thing again, but zoomed out. So now you can see a little more of it. So what do you think you're looking at now? Now you can see a little bit more of this thing. Do you still think it's an octopus? Bacteria? A crab? I thought you're quite close with a crab, actually. So what this is it is a foot, actually. So here's the original page. You're very close with a hermit crab. This is a diving beetle. So this is, I love this picture from our world. So you can see on here this, these big, wide, flat areas. So these are like this because this animal can walk on water. Yes, so that's why it looks like that. Anyway, little activity for you, something you can do when you've got an interesting photo. Zoom in, show one part of it to the students, ask them what they think it is, and then zoom out and show them a bit more. All right, but I wanted to talk to you about how maybe teachers often do activities like this and ask questions in class. So let's imagine that we're a typical teacher. We've got this picture on the board and we're asking the students what it is. A typical teacher might pick a student and say, Martin, what do you think this is? And Martin here, he might say, oh, sorry, well, once you've asked Martin, I think what happens is the other students think, this is for Martin. I don't need to pay attention anymore. And Martin says, it's a foot. And then, of course, the teacher tells the student, you got it right. Very good. Well done. So I think that's a sort of typical interaction. But I think this is a time that lots of students get bored because, well, one student's answered and lots of other students think, well, I don't have to pay attention. I don't have to answer. So another way of asking questions is to ask a question in class and then pause and wait for students to put up their hands. And then after the hands go up, you can pick a student. But remember, while students are putting up their hands, I think what students are doing is they're usually answering the question in their own heads. Now, I've read some research on this. I think students start doing this around age 5 or 6. Right? They start using their what's called their inner voice to answer questions. And then afterwards, you can choose a student to answer. And after they've answered, don't say very good. Don't tell the student if they got it right or wrong. You can ask the rest of the class to respond. Okay, was the student right? Do you agree with them? So here's a little example. So we could say, what can you see? Or what do you think this is? And the little girl earlier who was thinking, I don't need to pay attention, she now needs to answer the question in her head. I think it's something. And then we can still pick Martin if we want to, and Martin can say it's a foot. And then we can ask the rest of the class who agrees with Martin. And you say 3, 2, 1, show me your thumbs, and get students to give a thumbs up if they agree, or a thumbs down if they disagree. All right, so you can quickly get an answer from all of the students in the class, involve everyone, get them all to answer the question, but maybe only one student speaks out loud, but everyone's still engaged. No one gets bored. All right, another common time I find that students get bored is when teachers invite two students to the front of the class to perform something. It could be reading out loud, could be performing a dialogue, something like that. So I wanted to show you this a little activity I sometimes do for dialogues, which is show students a picture. I love this picture here, this little boy laughing and the little girl smiling. So I want you to imagine, what do you think they're saying to each other? Now, if we're doing this in class, we could make this dialogue a little bit longer. But today, you can just tell me, what do you think these two students are saying? Or let's make a dialogue here. What do you think person one says, and what do you think person two replies? What do you think might be in this dialogue here? So we've got one student, he's smiling and laughing. Someone else is, the little girl showing them a mobile phone. Great, so Aaron says, the little boy says, let's sneak out early for a break. And the little girl says, great, my parents will come and get me if I go out early. Great, Kent says, haha, that's a funny picture of you. So maybe they're looking at a photo together on the phone. Great, Strelick says, that superhero looks like you. Maybe the little girl says, oh, I'm so embarrassed. Or maybe that's right. Great, love your answers there, okay? So let's imagine that we did this in class and I got some of you to come to the front and perform your dialogue for everyone else. What do you think everyone else in the class would do? Well, I think we often expect students to listen politely, but usually I find students look like this. When you get two students to come to the front to do a dialogue, they start whispering to each other. They're not paying attention. Maybe they are preparing to do their own dialogue, but they're definitely not listening to what I want them or what you want them to listen to. So I've got 2 or 3 techniques here to get students to listen to each other. So the first technique here is very simple, just record the information. So let's say students go to the front, read out a dialogue or read out some information about themselves. Maybe everyone else has to fill out a table, write down what they said, almost like a student-to-student dictation. Maybe a little bit more interesting, this is one of my favorite ones. I call this one guess the emotion. So what you can do is you can get students to pick an adjective or an adverb before they perform their dialogue to everyone else. And they have to use that emotion or that adjective or that adverb when they're reading the dialogue. So maybe a student might pick a word, they don't tell anyone else what it is, and they read their dialogue. So they might say, oh, that superhero looks like you. Right? And everyone else has to listen. And then at the end of the dialogue, they guess, I think your emotion was sad. All right, so you get the students to listen for more than just the words. You can also get students to guess the context. All right, so let's imagine that we've done a dialogue, but we've not said who the dialogue is between. Right, we could perform the dialogue and then ask everyone to guess who is talking to whom here. Or the last one, if we're performing a dialogue straight from a course book or reading something out loud, we can tell students, change some words in the dialogue. And then everyone else has to listen and try to remember which words have been changed. Okay, so there's a few different techniques for when students perform at the front to get them to listen to each other. So if they're performing, give everyone else a listening task. Could be recording information, could be spotting mistakes or guessing the emotions of the performers. Okay, so that was boredom. So we had attention, using praise strategically. We looked at boredom, getting students involved in whole class activities, giving students a reason to listen to each other. Next, this is case C. We are looking at Cynthia. So why do you think Cynthia is behaving like this? Cynthia's teacher is handing out pencils. We're about to do a matching activity. And when his teacher gets when the teacher gets to Cynthia, Cynthia says, I want a blue pencil. And the teacher just gives her a yellow pencil and says, it's not important, doesn't matter. And then Cynthia gets very upset and she refuses to do the matching activity and she stops participating, stops taking part in class. So why do you think Cynthia is behaving like this? Why do you think Cynthia is behaving this way? Okay, so Charmaine says she feels like her feelings were dismissed. She feels unheard. Great, love that answer. Blankita says, yeah, the teacher's attitude. I mean, I can understand the teacher's attitude because the teacher's trying to get through the class. Maybe they've only got 15 minutes left. But wonderful. James says she wants some control. Absolutely. Aaron says blue must be her favorite color. I'm sure that's true as well. Yeah, Belinda says she wants to get what she wants. Indeed. So really here, I think this one is all about control. Yes. So some students really like being in control. Yes. Srilik says she feels like her choice is not valued by the teacher. So what's the challenge here? We all like being in control, don't we? And I think it's stressful for all of us when we're not in control. So about a year ago, I was still here, still in the same apartment, but it was the lockdown in Shanghai and we couldn't leave our house for almost 2 months, right? I had very little control over a lot of things in my life. It felt very stressful. So as adults, when we don't have control, we really don't like it, right? And students, or children in particular, often have very little control over their lives, right? They often don't get to choose what they eat, what clothes they wear, what they do. They often, especially at school, have almost no control over what they study. Okay, so I think that can feel very stressful for students. So offering students some limited choices can allow them to use their power in a positive way. Yeah, Megan here says, humans really need to feel a sense of agency. Absolutely, we all like being in control. So solutions, I would say, give students choices. The older the students are, the more choices you can give them. And what you're really getting students to do here is, as I say, use their power in a positive way. Now, what do I mean by power? Well, every student in your class has power. They all have the power to disrupt your class. All of your students, if they want to, could be like Cynthia, say, I'm not taking part, right? You can just stop working. Or they could do worse. They could start disrupting your class, causing trouble. So all students have power. But I think to be successful teachers, we need to let students use that power in a positive way, right? Give them some choice, give them some control. Now, there's lots of ways you can do this. You can give students control over who they work with. For the youngest students, you can give them a choice. Let's say when they're coloring, do you want to color this coloring sheet or this coloring sheet? For older students, you can give them choices over class projects, right? Do you want to make a poster about this thing or write a pretend interview with someone that you read about? But the example I wanted to talk to you about was giving students what I call a way out. So really, I mean here, including some choices when you solve behavioral issues. So let's imagine, and this is a true example actually. So I think it was last year or the year before, I was teaching a class and a very cute little girl called Zoe. And Zoe was quite naughty and always brought toys into class. And she loved bringing these toys out in class. And I think what I would have done when I was a new teacher is I would have said to Zoe, give me the toy. Come on, stop playing with that. Give me the toy. Now, if you do that, student can say to you, no, I'm not giving you the toy. Now the student has taken control of the class, right? You're not in control anymore. The student is. But what I did with Zoe, what I started doing was giving choices. So instead of that, I said, Zoe, you can't play with your toy now. Do you want to give me the toy and I'll give it back to you later? Or do you want to put the toy in your bag? And surprise, surprise, Zoe put the toy in her bag. Okay, so gave her a choice and she was able to choose one of the things to do. Here's another example for you. Let's imagine that two students are talking to each other. One student is disturbing someone else and you want them to move seats. So you could say to the student, hey, stop talking, stand up, come and sit here. Sit in this seat at the front. Instead of saying that, what kind of choice do you think you could give this student? How could you give this student a way out instead of just telling them to change seats? What do you think? Great. Someone here, Hitet, says, it works. I used to say that, let me throw it away, or you can keep it in your desk. Great. Okay, so my example here, here's what I would say. Instead of saying to the students, move to this seat at the front, I might say, okay, stand up. Do you want to move next to Sarah, or do you want to move next to this seat here? Or someone in our webinar this morning said, do you want to stop talking or move to the seat at the front? You can choose, right? And there you're also showing the student what the consequence of their behavior will be. Yeah, pick where you want to sit. You can't keep sitting here. Or here's another example. Let's say we've got a student and they are not working. You could say to them, stay behind after class and finish your work. All right, not very positive. So how do you think you could give this student a choice here? Yeah, so Megan says you could maybe give the student a choice where you could say, do you want to keep sitting here and pay attention, or do you want to come to the front of the class? Yeah. So I would say for this one, instead of staying behind at the end, you could say, do you want to stay behind after class, or do you want to keep working now? Yeah, Chris says, you can play when you finished, or you can stay behind and play a little later. All right, so the point there is we're just giving students a way out. And really, I think the thing always to avoid with this is sending a student outside of class, right? I think that's the most extreme example of this, because if you do that, of course, students can just say, no, I'm not going out of class. Yeah, so Rashana says, do you want to finish now, or do you want to stay back later and finish it? Great, Rashana, much better than mine, I think. Okay, so we've looked at 3 of these, A, B, C, attention, boredom, and control. And we looked there at giving students a way out. Next, this is case D. Don't worry, we're only going up to E. We're not doing the whole alphabet. So for D, this is Danny. So why do you think Danny is behaving this way? So Danny is one of the lowest level students in his class. Danny's teacher likes to do competitions in class, but Danny doesn't like losing. And Danny sometimes refuses to participate in class and in activities, and talks less and less in class. And sometimes when an activity starts, he just doesn't want to participate. He just takes his comic out of his bag and he just starts reading that. So why do you think Danny is behaving in this way? Yes, okay, so Charmaine says this type of practice is sapping his confidence. Yeah, he feels he can't succeed. Great. So I think that's a really common reason for misbehavior is students are avoiding doing something that they think they're going to fail at. Yeah, so James here said maybe the challenge is too hard for him. Yeah, so I think for this student, the class is at the wrong difficulty level. I think that's the problem here. Now, the challenge is if we find something too easy or too difficult, we usually give up. I think this is true for adults and for kids, right? I don't know if you're a musician, I like playing the guitar, and if I try to learn a new song and it's too hard, I give up, right? But if it's too easy, well, that's not really interesting either, so I might give up as well. But if it's a little bit of a challenge, if it's at the right difficulty level, then I'll keep going. And I think that's the same thing for students. So another challenge, I think, is we all teach classes with students of different ability levels in them. And that means some students finish activities much faster or much slower than other students in the class. And that can mean some students, when they finish, they've got nothing to do. And slower students, they might feel really frustrated that they can't finish something by the time the teacher moves on. So the solution I'm going to show you today is give instructions that let some students do more than others. Now, obviously, we're talking about differentiation here. We could do a whole 1 hour workshop on differentiation. This is just one small technique, but I think you might find it quite useful. And it allows everyone, I think, to feel a sense of completion and work at their own pace. So here is an example from our world. So this is a little gap fill activity. So you can see at the top here, we have a swimming pool, a zoo, a stadium, and a mall. And we have to do a little gap fill with these. So let's take a look at some of these together. So we can even do the first one together. So Min wants to go to the blank because she loves crocodiles and monkeys. What do you think Min wants to go to, everyone? Do you think it's the swimming pool she can see the crocodiles and the monkeys in? Yeah, thank you, Charmaine. The zoo is where she wants to go. Absolutely. And what about Aziz? He wants to go to the blank. He likes to see his favorite soccer team. Is it the mall he likes to go to? Or the zoo where he sees his favorite soccer team? Yes, thank you, Blankita. The stadium, football stadium, absolutely. All right, so there's an example. So with an activity like this, absolutely fine, but some students, they might do it very quickly, other students might do it very slowly. So what can we do? Well, one thing we could do is we could say to students, do at least 2 of these questions. So we're not saying everyone has to do all 5, because that would mean some students would finish faster than others. We're just saying do at least 2, do 2 of them first. Okay, so maybe we've done these 2, the zoo and the stadium. We could also say to students, this one's good for naughty boys, I think, you can say score out one question that you don't want to answer. So maybe students can pick a question they think is difficult or one they think is easy and not answer it. But you can also say to students, after you finish for an activity like this, replace the second half of each sentence. Ooh, this is a bit more difficult now. So let's do this for the first one. So Min wants to go to the zoo. She loves the, what do you think? What could we replace the second half of this sentence with? Min wants to go to the zoo. She loves the pandas, says Charmaine. Fantastic. Okay, so now we've made this activity a little bit more difficult. Great. Margarita says she loves the elephants. That's my favorite animal. The bears, the lions. Fantastic. And what about Aziz? He wants to go to the stadium. He blank. What do you think Aziz wants to do? Aziz wants to go to the stadium. He blank. Well, it doesn't matter. You don't really have to tell me. But the point is, okay, he likes to see the cheerleaders, says Charmaine. Indeed. All right, or he has a match at the stadium. That's great, Rena. So you can see there, right, that already, just with you all doing this, you're able to start being a little bit more creative by scoring out the second half of the sentences. Also, with this first sentence, we just scored out the object in the sentence, but the second sentence, we scored out the verb and the object. Yeah, so some of you said, like Chris here, really complex sentence. He likes to take photographs of the famous players. All right, So that's something, a little extension for students. And we can even say to students, or after you finish, after you've rewritten the second half of the sentences, write about where you want to go. Okay, so we can see there that for some students, really low-level students, they might just do a couple of questions, right? Some students might do 4 or 5 sentences. Some students might replace half of the answers, and some students might write their own ideas. And just as Julie says, personalized, let students use language that they've used elsewhere. And I think with that, for those students, that's got to be more interesting, I think, than doing you know, just filling in the gaps, right? You're really using this opportunity to let them say a bit more. Okay, so open-ended instructions. The idea here, just giving instructions that allows some students to do more, some students to do less, and lets everyone feel a sense of completion working at their own pace. So it could be do so many of the questions. Could also be, I mean, there's so many other things you could do with this. You could say to the students, after you finish this with your partner, do a spelling test with the words on the page. If you're doing something with kindergarten students, you could say, after you finish, you can go and pick a book and read one of the books quietly. Anything, right? So many different things you could do with this, but I think it's such a useful thing to do to make sure that really, not that we expect every student to do the same amount of work in the same time, because that's really impossible, but just that we have more or less work for students to all do in the same amount of time. Okay, so we've looked at attention, students wanting attention, students being bored, students wanting control, lessons being at the wrong too difficult or too easy. Quick question from Chris: should we prepare a notebook for them to write down? I mean, you could do, yeah. You could just ask them to write that maybe underneath on the course book. Up to you, really. Okay, so here's our last example. This is case E. So again, this is Eva. So tell us, why do you think Eva is misbehaving? So Eva is 7 years old. She's very outgoing, very talkative. This is my friend's daughter. Every time in class, she gets sent to the back of the room for talking too much. But after class, her teacher and even her parents ask her, do you know why you went to the back of the class? Do you know what you did wrong? And Eva says, no, I don't know. Aaron says she's in denial. So what do you think that Eva, why do you think Eva's behaving in this way? Okay, so Victor says that's just her nature, her personality, someone that likes talking, likes more physical activities. Oh, I can see your idea here, going for energetic. Well, I think with this student, it is exactly what James said. She's got no clear expectations of the rules, just like 1, 3, 4, 7, 5 says. She doesn't know what's expected of her. All right, so expectations, really important if you're a manager at work, but also really important if you're teaching students at school. So the challenge, all students really, I guess, have more than one teacher. And every teacher they have probably has different rules. I know some teachers that let their students shout out in class and, you know, come into the class on the breaks and things that I wouldn't let them do. So really difficult or really confusing for the students, having different rules for different classes and different places. And I think younger students sometimes forget the rules, but I think if you involve students in creating the rules, that can make them easier to remember. So the solution I'm going to show you with this today is involving your students in making the rules for the class. So let's talk a bit about setting expectations for your students. So I've got a Klein here. So on the left is less student involvement, and on the right is more student involvement. So the least student involvement is just telling the students the rules. A little bit more is maybe checking the rules with the students. You could say, what can you do in class? What can't you do in class? Very simple, right? Students say can run, can't run, can speak English. Yeah. You get students to rewrite the rules in their own words. You can get students to write their own rules and maybe vote for those. Or the activity I'm going to show you, nice critical thinking activity, is getting students to think about the classroom rules from different points of view. Okay, so in this activity, what we do is we say to the students, I want you to think about different people and what they would want the classroom rules to be. And you give students different bits of paper. So what do you think the teacher would want the classroom rules to be? What do you want the classroom rules to be? What do you think the school owner or the headmaster would want the school to the rules of class to be? And what do you think your parents would want the rules to be? So maybe you can type in the box some of your ideas about what you think those different groups of people might want the rules to be. I'll just show you very quickly what my students wrote. So my students wrote things like obey the teacher, listen to the teacher, don't shout in class. But then for themselves, they said things like feel free to speak out, speak loudly, I guess maybe so other students can hear you. Write notes quickly. For the school, they wrote don't run in the hall, don't eat in class, don't fight, help your classmates. And parents, they thought parents would say no phones, participate in class, and yeah, take notes and tell your parents what you learned at the end of class. And then after all that, we got the students to pick the most important ones and combine those together to make a little poster. Yes, and then also something I think nice that you can do with this is you can include some values, you can revise your notes. So here's a little example from our world of value, protect water. So maybe if this is something that you're talking about, you know, where's water used at school? Maybe you could get your students to revise the rules using some of these ideas, right? And the same with, yeah, if you've got values as well, you can get students to incorporate and update the rules of class. Okay, so there was our A, B, C, D, E. We've got attention, students wanting attention, and our solution for that was using praise strategically. Boredom, making sure students are involved and have a reason to listen. Control, giving students options and a way out. Difficulty level, giving open-ended instructions. And for expectations, setting the rules collaboratively. Now, I realize I'm running a little bit over time here, but I'll go over these very quickly. These are some of my top tips for when things go wrong in class, right? Because I think they do sometimes. So very quickly, de-escalate. I would say don't make things worse. So if a student's getting upset, just leave it for a while, right? Don't make things worse. All right, that's my first rule. Give students a way out, right? You know, like the art of war. Don't fight an army up against a cliff. Make sure your students can see a lesser of two evils option, a way out. When students are misbehaving, find students who are behaving well, praise them. Also, I think really important, ignore behavior in class which doesn't stop other students from learning. Sometimes I see teachers really stopping, maybe the whole class is learning apart from one student, and the teacher stops the whole class, interrupts everyone, and distracts everyone by telling off one student. Not very useful, right? So I would say much more useful than that is ignore behavior which doesn't stop other students from learning. Reflect on what you can do differently. You can't change your students, you can't change their personalities, but you can change your teaching. And then reframe emotions. So if you've got students who maybe are upset in class, you can talk to them afterwards. So let's say you've got a student who's shouted or argued with another student. Afterwards, you can say to them, this is really not like you. You don't normally behave like this. Are you okay? Has anything bad happened recently? Right? Maybe your student might say, well, you know, I was feeling angry. And you can say, okay, I understand. What can you do differently if you feel angry? What can you do next time if you feel angry? Let students reframe those emotions. And remember that what you do might stay with your students for the rest of their lives. When I think back to my time at school, I can't remember very much of what happened at school, but I can remember being punished, right? So just remember that every time you punish your students, you are creating an impression that might stay with them for 50 years. All right, so very quick summary. Just remember, punishment creates a lot more problems than it solves. Think about why your students misbehave and try to be proactive in solving behavior problems. Okay, think about why and solve the problems from that point of view. Thanks everyone so much for listening. Maybe you can give us some quick feedback. Maybe you can type in the chat from 1 is no to 5 is yes. Do you now have more strategies for managing students' behavior? You can 555. Thanks, James. You can also tell us B, which technique from today are you most excited about trying with your students? And if you've still got a question, you can type the question in the chat. I can see we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A. Catherine says, is it acceptable to punish the whole class for the mistake of one student? Well, I would say, Catherine, if you do that, if you punish the whole class for what one student does, I would expect most students in the class will think that is very unfair. And I would expect a lot of your students would think less of you as a teacher afterwards. And Charmaine says, if you're a specialist teacher that makes rounds to the homerooms, how do you set rules? Yeah, well, I would say, Charmaine, that you can make setting the rules an activity in itself, right? So you can get students to think about what should be a rule, what shouldn't be a rule, vote for the rules, discuss the rules. You can even get students to write, what do you do if another student is breaking a rule? Right, so what can I do if someone is not paying attention? How can I remind them in English to pay attention? So I think all those things are great English practice. Yes, great, great. Okay, so thanks everyone. Maybe I do sound Scottish after all, says Blanquita. Thanks for coming, everyone. We will email you or Julie will email you the recording link. And the certificate tomorrow. Isn't that right, Julie? I'll hand over to you.
Right. Yes. Thanks, Ross. Can we give Ross a round of applause, like a virtual butterfly cheer for Ross? Thank you, Ross.
Well, I've never had a butterfly cheer before. That's exciting.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ross. It's always great to hear Ross's sessions, lots of insightful, inspiring elements that we can learn from. So we hope that you enjoyed the session. Thanks, Ross. The recordings, yes, definitely you will receive those tomorrow with the e-certificates. So just check your inbox tomorrow. Within 3 business days, we will have those sent to you. And I think there's some more information about upcoming webinars, which Ross will be able to share with us. And that is about a National Geographic Explorer Classroom, which is actually the first one that we're trying in Asia. And it says here March 30th, but this is Eastern time, so it would be March 31st for us. And it's an Explorer that comes live on a webinar, and it's for your students. So you can actually sign up and your students will be able to watch the session live. So please, if you're interested, I would encourage you to take this opportunity to meet and explore live in your classroom. So please do sign up. And we have more great webinars coming up. So please check out nglAsia.com. I think I'll just drop that in the chat box. We do have some more webinars at nglAsia.com. And also the examples that Ross shared today are from Our World 2nd edition. So that's from National Geographic Learning. And if you'd like to check that out, please do so. National Geographic Learning, Our World 2nd edition. And everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We hope that we can see you again next time. And thank you from Ross and National Geographic Learning. See you again all. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Shirley. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
It was a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Bye.
See you next time.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.